Hello, good evening. My name is Kaustup Bandyopadhyay, and I will be moderating for today's roundtable on institutionalizing online citizen participation in public policy making, focusing in India. On behalf of PRIA, International Center for Nonprofit Law, ICNL, and CIVIS, let me have the honor to welcome you all. First of all, congratulations to all of us on the Constitution Day of India. In 1949, the Constitution Assembly adopted the Indian Constitution on this day, which came into effect on 26 January of 1950. This particular roundtable on institutionalizing online citizen participation could not be held any other days than this auspicious day. Friends, this is the 16th conversation organized by Participatory Research in Asia as part of its 40th anniversary celebration. We also take this opportunity to share the preliminary findings of a study on institutionalizing online citizen participation that PRIA undertook with support from ICNL. This conversation is being organized in partnership with International Center for Nonprofit Law, ICNL, based in the US, and CIVIS, based in India. We are extremely proud of this partnership and solidarity, and a special word of thanks to David and Natasha from ICNL and Antara and her colleagues from CIVIS for partnering with PRIA. We also have an outstanding list of speakers and discussions, and we are eager to hear their thoughts today. And since this conversation is being organized as part of PRIA's 40th anniversary, friends, allow me to take this opportunity to share a few words about PRIA's journey in all these years. So, friends, PRIA's 40 years of journey has been about sustaining an independent, forward-looking, and energetic civil society organizations in an otherwise rapidly disruptive and uncertain world. We have always considered ourselves as educators and facilitators, supporting individuals, organizations, and grassroots initiatives to learn, change, grow, and sustain themselves. PRIA's support has been in the form of sharing information and ideas, generating new knowledge, building linkages and relationships, providing intermediation expertise, and at times emotional support. PRIA's theory of change follows bridging the supply and demand sides of any issue or theme we invest in. Efforts to mobilize individuals, especially the poor and marginalized sections, but increasingly also the middle class, make them aware of their rights and responsibilities, thus fueling their sense of agency to demand services, inclusion, participation, and knowledge. On the supply side, we work with the governments and private agencies and sensitize them to deliver their mandates and be accountable to the citizens. Over the last 40 years, PRIA has worked on right to learn, right to know, right to information, and right to participation through various thematic areas. And some of those thematic areas include citizen participation, gender integration, empowering civil society, decentralized community governance, sustainable urban future, and building knowledge democracy. As PRIA celebrates its 40th anniversary, we recommit ourselves for removing obstacles to sustainable change, raising individual and collective voices, and making democracy work for all in everyday life. Friends, PRIA's own identity is very much linked to promoting citizen participation, with a particular focus on the participation of poor, excluded, and marginalized. And today's conversation is to explore the new avenues of accelerating citizen participation in policy making, particularly using online digital technology. So we have an exciting program ahead. The way we have designed today's conversation, that my colleague Shruti Arora will present the preliminary and emerging findings of the research study to seek your comments and validation. Following that, we have requested Mr. Apar and Dr. Tandon to set the stage, and after that we will discuss the key discussion questions in smaller groups. And finally, we have requested David to highlight the key points from today's discussion as closing remarks. Just to remind ourselves some of the key questions that we want to explore in today's discussion. The first question is that, what are the current online mechanisms and practices for consulting citizens in making laws and policies by the governments? What lessons can be drawn from the national and international experiences? And second, how have the non-governmental organizations attempted to influence the policymaking using online citizen participation? And these first two questions have been explored by the research to a great extent, but we also want to collect more information, more insights through these today's consultations. But what I will be emphasizing that today we really spend some more time on the third question. And the third question is that, what principles can be suggested in making online citizen consultation more reliable, inclusive, and continuous? So that's the broad sort of introduction to today's discussion. And let me see if Apar has joined today. Shruti, can you see Apar with us?
Yeah, Apar is here.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Apar, for joining in time. So let me first invite my colleague Shruti to make a presentation.
Yeah, hi everyone. It is such a great pleasure to be presenting the research study today. So as we all know that this was a study that was conducted on institutionalizing online citizen participation and participation in public policy especially. So I want to just begin with talking about what are some of the trajectories of online citizen participation and how it has traditionally been understood and what are the approaches that have been used in this work. So if we look at participation from below, it means that it is a way or an approach for the excluded to affirm their demands and challenge power through organized groups and social movements. And it sees participation as more than a consultation with loosely defined communities. Social movements by the excluded, which means access to and control over natural resources or development resources, has been an important area of work, and be it with forest dwellers or strengthening women's movement in the rural parts of India, as well as self-reliance, which is based on the Gandhian principles of learning from everyday experiences. And this kind of work started in the 70s, 80s in the country. Then we have participation as beneficiaries, users, managers, where the citizens are, seen as beneficiaries. And this goes back to the 90s and 80s when international development agencies and national governments were kind of investing in participation. And an important feature of this was partnering with local NGOs and opening up space for people's knowledge and involvement in development planning and implementation, but also seeing it as, beneficiaries as passive recipients or as users and choosers rather than makers and shapers or movers and shapers of their own policies, programs, or futures. Then we come to the language of multiple stakeholders getting included in participation. So in 1994, the World Bank defined participation as a process through which stakeholders influence and share control over development initiatives and the decisions and resources of which affect them. And we see that the narrative of multiple stakeholders' participation came into existence, which included the private sector as well. And the initiatives of organizations such as Priya shifted back the focus on primary stakeholders participation, which means the excluded persons. We have participation in democratic governance for exercising the rights of citizenship. And this was also a time when we saw participation come to the national framework in the country with the 73rd Amendment in the Constitutional Act. And Panchayati Raj institutions were given a constitutional status, which gave rise to the new concepts and discourses of participatory governance and participatory citizenship. It meant that the citizens are not just the beneficiaries, users, voters, or consumers, but political right holders in the local and decentralized governance. What today also is participation for demanding transparency and accountability. And the examples of this could be Right to Information Act and the movement that was around that, social accountability programs and practices that we are seeing today, as well as in 2010, what we saw, the anti-corruption movement, are all examples of demanding transparency and accountability.
Great, yes.
Okay, so where are we today and what has emerged from this study? What we are seeing is that there is a lot of potential of digital and information technology to accelerate citizen participation. And this is because there is ease of participation, which means that there is remote connectivity and larger people can access information, can participate in the processes. And so scaled up outreach is there when there is limited resources. It also means that a lot of consultation processes where feedback comes in larger numbers. Artificial intelligence technology can help us label and sort out for ease of analysis and decision making. And it also means that we can access the decision makers because now the government is interested in something like Digital India. And so greater accountability of the decision makers towards the citizens. So these are broadly the potential of information technology for citizen participation. Now, what are some of the contextual barriers to the participation? And I want to stress on the fact that there is a huge digital divide. And this is digital divide because of socioeconomic, cultural backgrounds of people, the location of people, but also things like the bandwidth, how much space is there in the phone, how many apps can one download, electricity issues, connectivity issues, speed issues. And these are all infrastructural challenges that we are seeing today. And for making technology work for all, I think it is important that we discuss digital divide in much greater detail and not just do a lip service to this. The other challenge that we are seeing today is also that the staff is not trained. We know that the programs get developed at the higher level, people who are at the higher ranking in the government system and people in the lower ranking, for example, at the district or block level, a lot of times do not know how to use the technology. We're also seeing that due to majoritarian democracy that we live in, mostly the views of the majority matters, and hence the minority doesn't get listened to. This could mean that we are leaving out important points, and this may also mean that it is not just religious or caste-based minorities, but also non-popular opinions or views are not taken into consideration. The other thing that we are seeing today is that what you see and what I see is very different because it is based on our browsing histories. And due to that, we are also seeing that there are more polarized opinions, and what goes behind the scenes is very different for you and for me. So that is one important challenge that we are seeing, and that is causing polarization of views. Internet as a space is also not a safe space. There's a lot of trolling, threats, etc. that we see today, especially when it comes to political discussions. And last but not the least, in fact, the most important is when we talk about citizen participation, what exactly are we talking about? Are we talking about experiences of citizens? Do we want to consult them for opinions, perceptions, evidence? or something else. And while there may be a clarity in terms of what one organization is doing, but I think it is important to see what we are doing sectorally over here. So this is broadly what the landscape is looking like today. What online platforms are being used for: 1, information; 2, access; 3, redressal mechanism; 4, petitioning; 5, consultation and feedback. And this has come from multiple conversations that I've had with organizations. And these are some of the models that we know today. We also know that, there are multiple collaborations that are happening between organizations such as these. And there is an offline interface to it. Not everything is online. There are face-to-face meetings sometimes that are equally important strategies for organizations. So while the primary purpose of XYZ organization's digital platform is grievance redressal or informing the citizens or petitioning, it is to recognize that other strategies have also been used to expand the outreach and impact of citizen engagement. Next slide, please. Now, this is a framework that we have used for effective citizen engagement, and I'm going to talk in detail in the coming few slides on each of these points and what each of these points mean, what is the purpose, and what it would mean to do information or consultation or consolidation or going back to the citizens to close the feedback loop in an online space. The purpose of informing the citizens or to do citizen participation. Information is the most critical aspect in that, as information is power. So the purpose of this phase is to raise awareness about the laws, policies, entitlements, governance systems that are important for the development of the citizens. Unlike traditional ways where information sharing and mobilization of citizens would happen face-to-face, digital platforms are being explored for this today. Technology is being used to simplify the knowledge, raise awareness, and create mass base of informed citizens. Multiple types of platforms are being used for information giving, which includes participatory mobile platform, mobile phone applications, and organizational websites. The focus is on simplifying the information and making information accessible and contextual for a wider audience, in some cases in multiple languages or in local dialects as well. And then the following points is a set of recommendations for ensuring citizens are informed meaningfully using technology. Contextualizing the information according to the demographic is the most important aspect for citizen participation. We need to ensure that technology is used to leverage the process of contextualizing the information. Similarly, homogeneity in mobilization of the excluded groups is important to be considered. Again, the tech platforms need to reach out in a way that homogeneous communities are using it for what it was developed. Investing in building the capacities of the homogeneous community for citizen participation is important, such that they are considered equal and primary stakeholders for the consultation phase. The other critical point in this phase is for intermediaries to ensure that neutrality is maintained in summarizing the legal texts which adopt tech-based solutions. And then the privacy concerns that we are seeing today with technology, citizens need to be informed how their data is being used. And giving out sensitive information of tech users to powerful institutions is also an ethical concern that we are realizing. The next stage is of consultation. And the purpose of this phase is to consult the citizens for decision-making during policy planning. There are very limited CSO initiatives in the Indian context today doing this kind of work. And to do this, it is important to understand who we are consulting, what we are consulting them for, why are we consulting them, and how are we consulting them. Consultation with the citizens have important considerations, such as all of these. And in this process, primary stakeholders are important to be considered. But then who else can be considered? Who else is an important stakeholder in this process, especially when there is a law which is not constituency based, but a generic one. Then reaching out to the excluded groups and identifying a pathway for intentionally doing that for the caste, gender, religion, location, literacy, language, ability or disability based minority groups, such that we do not do a disservice to it, but actually have technology that enables their participation equally. Meaningful citizen participation happens incrementally. And in a few examples that we saw from the study, we saw where citizens were consulted for policy making, both by CSOs and governments. There are different degrees of citizen participation along the scale of tokenistic participation to meaningful participation. And this change needs to be seen in a more incremental fashion. It is not a leap jump, as participation is a learning process, even for those who are being consulted. And then to do consultation, there are some of the do's and don'ts. Just to highlight a few, consultation process needs to set the norms or ground rules on the platform to encourage engaging respectfully. Acknowledge feedback received, and the administrator can do this. Encourage respondents to keep the conversation relevant and provide the option of making the submissions anonymously. Now, it is easier to collect data and hold consultations, but it is not so easy to consolidate that data. The steps in the process include sense making of the data that has emerged from consultations, finding out the trends and patterns in the data, using some labels, and then consolidating the results. The process and consolidate to process and consolidate the scaled up inputs from the citizens, the technology needs to enable the following. It needs to enable getting disaggregated data so that we can see what minority groups are saying, what women are saying, what caste-based minority groups are saying, etc. It needs to enable us in seeing what the minority views are, and so what the less popular opinion is. It needs to give the transparency, especially to the citizens who were part of the consultation. So they need to know what technology was used to consolidate their feedback and what results have emerged from that. And that transparency is important. And sometimes confidentiality of this sensitive data is very important. And just to give you an example, when I was involved in an audit of health facilities with the young people constituency, we had gone to submit the findings and recommendations to the concerned health department. They asked us if we can tell them the names of the bad performing centers and better performing centers. And then we politely said that there are a few things that need your attention in all the centers, because we thought that he might just want to take a shortcut by penalizing the bad ones without taking long-term actions. So in such situations, what does one do? And I'm sure such situations are very common. So considering confidentiality in such cases is very important. And then social accountability approach can be submitted, especially when we're submitting the report to the government. And what I mean by social accountability is that the government has made commitments internationally, nationally. There are national frameworks that obligate the state to encourage citizen participation. So that makes the state accountable to the citizens for including their voices meaningfully. And then we come to the last stage. Next slide, please. Which is the feedback loop, which is the process where the government goes back to the citizens to complete the feedback loop and show that it cares and that it is invested in the process. And this is where an exchange between the citizens and governments can happen meaningfully. And this would mean having a communication exchange, giving feedback to the citizens to see, what was important, what decision was taken, what was the rationale for the decision taken, and explain how the inputs were used to close the feedback loop. The communication change between the government and the citizens is very important. The government officials need to be trained to do this too. We often see that government officials higher up in the ranking who envision the digital programs know about the programs, but in the lower rankings, they are not trained in using the technology and hence implementation gaps, etc. And it is also important that the feedback in this stage that comes showcase a long-term vision with the inputs received. So the government needs to tell back to the citizens that how their inputs are going to be used for a longer period of time. I'll stop here, but just to say that this is a cycle of participation and it is a learning process for everybody. So looking forward to the discussions from here. But thank you so much for listening to this.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shruti, for this reasonably comprehensive presentation. I think you have touched upon many crucial points, and we look forward to take some of these points further in our breakout session, but also in some of the plenary sessions. There are very few plenary sessions here. Most of the time we'll be spending in smaller groups to have more deeper conversation. Thank you once again, Shruti, for laying the foundation for today's discussion. Let me now invite Mr. Apar Gupta, who is the Executive Director of Internet Freedom Foundation based in India. And the topic that we have suggested to talk about is use of technology to strengthen citizen participation in policymaking. And as sort of highlighted in Shruti's presentation, there are pitfalls and there are pathways. So would like to hear from Apar, what are your thoughts on how to take this technology for accelerating, for strengthening citizen participation? And what are the things that we should keep in mind while advocating for greater infusion of technology in citizen participation? Apar.
Dr. Bandyopadhyay, thank you so much for inviting me to make this address. I see a lot of my fellow allies and leaders in the non-profit sector here who work on this problem as well as this opportunity in a very dedicated manner. We've been doing it for long periods of time through different strands. So I thought what I could do best in these introductory remarks is to set a stage for the breakout sessions with certain data as well as developments I've seen in public consultation processes, much more towards the public sector and how it's approached it over some period of time. What may be certain relevant basis for common understanding that can promote a deeper conversation in our breakout sessions. So firstly, I think Shruti, when she was doing the presentation, quite clearly set out that the fundamental challenge remains access and inclusivity. Now, even though access and inclusivity has been an issue which has been worked on and has improved tremendously in India, it remains one for specific pockets which will continue to face a degree of exclusion from meaningful high-speed internet access, thereby preventing their participation through most digital modes and media. Thereby, I think there will be a combination both of online as well as in-person using technology measures, public participation tools, which will need to be designed accounting for this. Now, let's just take certain statistics to bolster this argument. Now, you may have seen the National Family Survey, which was made this year, where it demonstrated that internet access across those 10 states which were surveyed, at least 10 till I looked at the data, was that there are chronic inequalities based on income, which we already know, but they are also based on gender. So, for instance, in Bihar, we always knew this anecdotally, but it is actually a very shocking statistic that there, in every family, even if a man gets access to the internet, it is 50% less likely that the woman also has internet access even once in a shared smartphone. So we should always remember this as we look forward towards encouraging greater degrees of participation by all sections of society, because I think that's really important. Because otherwise, the most privileged economically, socially, will essentially be participants without quite often the beneficiaries of government schemes and programs who may be able to give us very vital and relevant inputs with respect to the system design or the delivery of those programs may not be involved in that. So that's one. The second thing I would also like to stress upon is that even in pockets where we think that, for instance, if you just do it in Delhi or Bangalore, certain cities which are as per the telecom regulatory authority's data itself having, let's say, 2 internet connections for every 1 person. That's the level of tele density, for instance, in a city like Delhi. But you need to also consider there are other reports and findings. For instance, if you want school children to participate in a consultation, I was just preparing for this talk today, and I saw a new study by Line Asia as well as the National Council for Advanced Economic Research. It said close to 25% children in India did not have internet access during the pandemic. So for all the remote learning objectives, which were intended over this 2-year period, close to at least 25% children in India just did not even have the ability of accessing it. And we need to remember all of this, because then it becomes important in the larger policy prescription beyond the participation itself as well. The other thing I would like to also touch upon is what certain studies are now demonstrating as maybe the need for us to factor in what may be the limits of online per se participation. Because quite often, see, you do want people to participate as a person who may know the policy area with a deeper level of expertise, with some amount of patience. But the kind of response you get from them is quite similar to a response to a social media comment on Facebook or Instagram. And I've seen this on eGov. I've seen this on other platforms as well. I've seen this in our own work as well, right? And quite often, this is a challenge which can, to a certain degree, be met with context setting, by educating the audience. But we may also always remember that there are limits to what you can do in an online method and what you can do in physical spaces itself. For instance, if you look at the learning outcomes which have been demonstrated through the annual status of education report, that how does online education actually help children? And you can now also see not only parents who want children to go to school, so they have some time for themselves, but even children cribbing that they want to go to school, not only because they get to meet the batchmates, which is a sense of community, which is sometimes important in public participation processes, especially around, let's say, in communities which do not have traditions of individual participation, but of community participation, right? So it's needed in that way. So that sense of community, which quite often comes through in-physical participation, can also be supported by digital technologies itself, by getting the word out, by ensuring that people, for instance, from 5 villages can talk to each other also, right? So there are innovative ways how technology can be used. We should, at the same point of time, not completely do away with in-person and what goes with our pre-existing understanding of what can make public participation stronger in terms of substance, value, as well as the kind of inputs which come through it. Finally, I'd just like to state certain best practices I've seen and certain poor practices I've seen to point a larger question mark as I walk away from this initial context setting. Over the years, close to a decade, I remember since being a law student, I have sent responses to the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India. To my embarrassment, they have published them. So they still remain online, right? And who does want their 10-year-old work to be online? But it's published, right? And if you look at the TRA consultation model, it's always approached it from essentially first publishing a background paper which includes the key economic highlights, the existing state of the regulation, and third, a comparative overview of practices on the specific topic or issue they are looking at, to pose questions which are clustered into specific groups. This is how it seeks public participation. Of course, it's expert public participation, not very public by itself. So they have a very specific constituency in mind. But let us look at the hallmark of transparency followed by them. They invite comments. All public comments are then published, and a 2-week counter comment period is also provided. If requests for extensions are requested from the TRA, it liberally provides them well in advance rather than on the last date of the consultation, thereby signaling intent and building trust. It does also prior to making its recommendations, sometimes also put out draft recommendations just to get informal ways of inputs. Because we also know expert participants, non-profits quite often reach informally also. And in-person meetings also communicate what may be responses. So this is also a very credible form of how it walks towards making its ultimate recommendations and reports, and then coming to the legal phrasing and the text which follows. So it doesn't start with a baked legal phrase or a section or a regulation. It actually evolves it over time, and those drafting choices I explained. But what are bad practices? For instance, if a government ministry invites a specific stakeholder group and shares a draft regulation with them, which is then leaked in the press because it impacts citizens very drastically, and then thereafter organizes a public consultation, publishes the responses, but for 2 years there are no responses, and publishes a completely new version of that regulation, then can we call that a fair regulation? Does that build trust? And does that help the government as well on those 2 new chapters it may have added, which were not considered and not sought input on, right? You cannot avoid that controversy by itself. It in fact contributes to a greater degree of that. And this is an actual example with the IT rules. And in closing, I'd just like to state that public consultation needs to be done at the municipal and the ground level, but this kind of standard setting and good practices need to be evolved at the federal level, at the level of, for instance, the central ministries, because they are the most powerful, they may have the most resources, and whatever they do will have the greatest degree of influence. For instance, I know some colleagues who work on state budgets have difficulty accessing them itself in terms of what is the fund utilization. And there's a greater degree of transparency at the level of the center in terms of what the initiatives of the union are. So things are good, but things are also bad in certain respects. And things can always be better when I say this. Okay, so some specific statistics. Firstly, to set context, there's a pre-consultation legislative policy in 2014. There's Arun PS on Twitter who goes by the handle Policy Chetan. He's analyzed the 29 total bills which are listed in the tentative schedule for the winter session of Parliament, out of which he says 17 saw no consultation. And from the 12 bills placed in the public domain for receipt of comments, in 6 cases did not adhere to the 30-day timeline. This is because certain statutes in India only provide for 21 days for consultations. With this, I think I've provided enough background, and I look forward to the breakout groups, Dr. Bandyopadhyay.
Thank you, Apar. Indeed, you have provided enough background and helpful to not only look at the good practices, but at the gaps where there are possibilities that additional steps with good intention of being transparent and being accountable to the people and citizens at large, that must be taken into consideration. So thank you, Apar, for all these comments, and we'll get back to you. We'll sort of come back to you during the breakout session and afterwards as well. Let me invite Dr. Rajesh Tandon, who is the founder president of Priya. And I know he has been an electronic engineer, despite the fact that he was an electronic engineer from IIT Kanpur. He has a lot of apprehension about technology and the way technology is capable or not capable of promoting citizen participation. But I want to hear some positive from you, Rajesh. And what are the possibilities?
Thank you very much, Kaustav. But first of all, thank you, Apar. You have set the tone very well after Shruti's presentation of the findings of the study that Priya has been doing. And we have all of you on this, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. About 1977, when I decided to go to some rural parts of Udaipur district for my PhD in management, I was looking at how development programs reach the tribals of Udaipur district. And I was sort of engineering management degree, so I was looking at it, somewhat conceptually. But in hanging around there for a year, I discovered that the framework by which these national programs were being designed and delivered, that framework somehow did not take into consideration diversities in context. And wherever you may remember that there is a very common language in Indian programming and policy programs, when policies turn into programs, it's called guidelines. And guidelines are supposed to be not guidelines, they're actually dictates. So the block development officer would say, sir, though these are guidelines, I could be flexible with these tribals. I know they are illiterate, but if I become flexible, somebody upper, in Jaipur or Delhi will ask me, why did I change the guidelines? So guidelines become cast in stone. It's actually a vocabulary that should not be used. It should be called permanent rules as opposed to guidelines. So when I raised this question about participation with that block development officer, that don't you think these tribals should participate? He said, why should they participate? Government knows what is good for them and we are delivering it. So what is participation? In my view, each one of us likes to participate in influencing our lives. Anything that comes to influence us, we want to shape it, influence it. That is participation. But centuries of social exclusion and hierarchies in society, not just economic, but social, as Apar was giving example of gender. Look at caste, look at tribes, look at minorities. Then, for many people at the bottom of the totem pole, the idea of participation itself to shape their own life is an impossible dream. So if we want to participate, we have to remove the obstacles that are in their way, because participation for me is a natural human tendency, natural human phenomena. It's like water. You remove the obstacles, it will find its path. Now, obstacles are at personal level. Obstacles are also at the community and institutional level. The most difficult part in promoting participation, and Apar hinted at that, is that for the subaltern groups, for the excluded groups, for vulnerable groups, it is not just individual participation. It is a communitarian, collective participation. And the purpose of developing a collective agency is to create the capacity to influence relations of power. And unfortunately, modern technology in its current manifestation, digital technology, is reinforcing greater authoritarian and top-down tendencies as opposed to liberating the potential of technology to empower people with not only access to authentic information, but capacity to collectivize and then develop collective agency to make their contribution towards a policy framework. In the past, civil society and many of us realized that we could work through representatives. And after all, democracy works through representatives. After all, India is a vibrant democracy, and certainly so, largest in the world. But representative participation per se has its limits because it does not necessarily voice the needs of the most marginal and the most excluded. And in recent years, the vote bank based politics, if you get 25% of the votes in your favor in a constituency, you basically win election because only 60% vote and there are 5 other candidates from opposing parties. And this methodology of the election has been mastered. It does not require, therefore, enabling voices from the bottom to make their representatives accountable. This is where technology can play a very significant role in enabling direct participation. Venkat is here, he will perhaps share information on right to information empowered people, and still information is being hidden. So you take the case of 2-3 significant legislation that were passed during the pandemic. The stakeholder participation clause in environmental considerations of a mining project were diluted. Labor codes have been implemented. When questions were raised, labor codes, they said we have consulted representative bodies of trade unions. Now, we have been working with 5,000 families of domestic workers in National Capital Region during the pandemic. Domestic workers are not even classified as labor. They have no representative in trade unions. So how do you get them to participate and share their perspective on what should be in the labor code, if at all? So exclusion happens many a times by inviting representatives, spokesperson, or even experts. And I think this is where, if technology is available to create a collective consultative process, hybrid mode, offline, online, and then using that collective agency to discuss the preferences and options. When I was growing up around high school time in UP, we had only 2 choices: become an engineer or a doctor. Now, this kind of forced choice on online consultation leaves very little option to dream of a world that the new generation is dreaming. And I think these are the kinds of issues that I look forward to my colleagues, the young colleagues, professional colleagues who are experts in technology, enabling this. Because we want to harness technology, but we want to harness from the point of view of the Antyodaya, the last person. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rajesh Bhai. As always, speechless, but I have to work for next 1.5 hours. Thank you, Apar. Thank you, Dr. Tandon, for setting the stage perfectly. So we are going for breakout sessions from here. I hope that all of you had a chance to look at the program design that we had shared with you. So we will break into 3 groups. My colleague Yashvi would help us to place in one of those 3 groups. But before that, before you join, click join. Let me say a couple of things. So in each group, you will have a moderator from one of us, and there will be a rapporteur who will sort of report back to the next plenary session. And in each breakout session, we have again requested 2 persons to speak first for 5 minutes each, and then we'll have a conversation. We want to hear everyone and want to learn from everyone's experience on this particular topic. That's very crucial. That's the responsibility of the moderators. And whatever you say, capturing that would be the responsibility of the rapporteurs. And like we are recording this session, in the breakout session, we will also try to record this conversation for for documentation purpose. So I hope that that should be okay with you. And I'm not going to read all 14 names who will be taking responsibilities for each of these breakout sessions. So please join your respective breakout groups, and we'll come back. The one thing is that one good thing about Zoom is that there is a time limit. So whether you have sort of completed your sentence or not, it will sort of throw you out from the breakout session and bring you back to the plenary session. So I'd sort of request our moderator to take care of that, and please enable everyone to speak adequately, but then come back on time for the plenary session. So thank you so much. Let's join the breakout room. Okay, thank you so much for coming back, and I hope that you had a wonderful discussion. At least our group had wonderful discussion in your respective groups. So we are very much eager to know what transpired in other two groups, and of course we will be reporting back from our group as well. So the idea is to make a short, presentation by each of the reporters. Don't take more than 3-4 minutes. Make just 3-4 bullet points which are significant and new to you, and came out of this discussion. So let me first invite Nikita Rakhiani to report back from breakout group number 1.
Yeah, thank you, Costa sir. This is a very difficult task to do. And our group had a wonderful discussion. People were from different organizations sharing about their experiences, lived realities, about the research they've done and learnings. So I would just quickly go through the points we've discussed during the discussion. And Costa sir, if you think I missed out something or understood incorrectly, please do add. So starting from Matt and Antara, there were two very, very relevant points made by both of them. Okay, so we started about discussing conventional forms of participation where government is the one sitting at the top and citizens at the bottom. And there's usually these government consultations do not take place online. So we discussed about the conventional forms of, and then we also, Matt raised this very important point of subconscious technology, on how a lot of data is being sent out and we are just consuming as citizens. So we need to be aware about how this technology is being used. Antara raised two important points that we need to share the lived experiences, and there are two key challenges that we also need to understand that responsiveness of the government, not just on policy, but also think about the culture of participations. So there was a question being raised that how do we build or create this belt of awareness where we can create knowledge to understand various thematics, and so that it can be more inclusive. So how do you enable the representation in way it is easy to reach to diverse stakeholders? When we were discussing about the subconscious technology, there was also one point raised about the ethical element attached to it. What is right in terms of public good, and raising collective understanding of issue to increase the participation. Then other participants in the group also shared, some of them shared about the issue of misinformation, which is leading to polarization. So when we talk about online engagement, this is also an important point to understand, and also reflecting upon the question that can technology enable a platform where both representative participation and direct participation can complement each other. There was another point raised where we discussed about the role of representatives, and we heard various participants sharing about how there is very limited scope for citizens and people's representatives to have conversations with each other. Government is doing a lot of consultations, but they're not that transparent, and there's no formal platform or mechanism for people's representatives and citizens to have a conversation and share their issues or understand how the policies are being framed, how the schemes are being implemented. Then we discussed various examples, and there was an example which came out about Chhattisgarh where a hybrid mode of discussion was used to understand the issue of migrant workers and how government and various stakeholders like journalists and other stakeholders came and have a discussion where people's voices were being heard and included. Then we discussed about, so one very important point which came out from the entire discussion was about the civic education. It is very important to make people realize it's easy to create a platform, but to maintain it, and we need to put in an effort to also make people realize how whatever is happening, what impact it is going to have on their life. So it's easy to create a platform, but to maintain it over a time where people actually understand the importance of having these conversation participants is also very important. So it's not just from the government or policymaker side, but from the citizen side as well. So we need to understand we need to invest and put in efforts to create civic education. We need to create multiple approaches for reaching out to the diverse people. As we know, India is a very diverse country, and it's not just about language, but culture and other backgrounds. So we need to create multiple platforms to reach out to people and for them to share what they want. And we also need to think and reflect upon how can we leverage the local strength of multiple intermediaries, which is not just elected representatives, but also RWA and caste-based organization and others. There's also a certain kind of language which is being expected from people when they participate in these consultations. So how can we create this culture of participation where people from diverse backgrounds can come together to ensure that all of them ensure that it's a collective issue and they need to take collective ownership of this issue. And few points. Okay, now we need to also understand how to create platforms or infrastructure that can be good, sustainable, and they are continued platforms and not the occasional platforms. There was also a point raised that we need civil society organizations in general need to create platforms that they can speak with each other, where they can plug in with each other, leverage where civil society can come to each other and share about how they can be supportive of public. And last point was raised about the values. We need to understand what kind of values are being used and embodied on different platforms. So we as a collective need to create those participation platforms which keep aside language and culture. We also need to, so I've already said this, but there was a point raised towards the end that we need to understand the use of multi-channel strategies, use strategies that blend virtual and in-person use of technology, scale used by greatest number of people like SMS. We need to look at local online networks. So towards the end, I would say that one point clearly came out that civic education, the other was that hybrid mode of participation should be used. That's it. I think, Costa, sir, if you want to add anything.
No, thank you so much. There is nothing to add. I mean, it was kind of such a rich and diverse discussion. Of course, it's not possible to capture everything in 3-4 minutes, but thank you so much, Nikita, for capturing most of the critical points. Let me now invite Shruti from Breakout Group 2.
So we also had quite a rich discussion, and there were many kind of new things that emerged, what people are already doing in their work and what they're planning to do in the coming future. We had one participant, Robert from Iceland, who talked about how they are working in Iceland and what kind of platform they're using. So on their platform, they encourage citizens to put down their ideas and have mediated discussion as to how ideas may work, may not work, and have dialogues around that part. They also encourage participatory budgets, and they're working towards that with the government. And the other important point that he raised was that, it is important to keep a check on the private companies. So it could be social media companies now, where the government might give out the participation element to the private companies, and then CSO voices may not be included. So point being that CSOs are equally important when it comes to participation. And the other thing that we were discussing was that on social media, on a platform such as Facebook, information is very fragmented, and information about participation needs to be systematized. And how can that be done? There can be different ways of doing that. And WhatsApp groups came as an example, that if you're part of a WhatsApp group, then you feel more connected to people, and there's a personalized kind of connection with people. So groups as a strategy might work for participation, for citizen participation. And then there needs to be mediation. In all of these cases, it was recognized that mediation is very important, and then we can think of stepped participation for everybody. I think in terms of the digital infrastructure, somebody from Umedyar Network, Charu from Umedyar Network, had said that these are all design choices, and it is our default a lot of times that we end up choosing English as our language because it is also easier and convenient. But it is important to kind of, challenge the default settings to be inclusive and, encourage participation maybe in local dialects or in different languages. The other thing was around the accessibility of websites, and all websites may not be accessible on phone. This is important given that in the Indian context, a lot of people use mobile phones, and the highest percentage of device is mobile phones in the country. Then from Karnataka, it was shared that something like Jan Suchna is being explored for service delivery, and especially ration delivery for citizens, because there's a lot of exploitation, bribery that happens within the government system. And this will make things transparent. I think the other thing was around safe space. And if, we have something like anonymity on a platform, will that become a safe space? Because a vulnerable person may not want to share their vulnerability in an online platform where they can't even share their name. So anonymity or non-anonymity, that was one discussion. And I think the other points was around, making the system more reliable, the digital platform, the digital system more reliable, because we are getting polarized information. So what is the most reliable information and what is the source of that? That is one of the important areas. Sumitra, if you want to add something to this.
Thanks, Shruti. Just one point about, sort of, can technology be used, leveraged to actually, when I participate on a technological platform, can I see, what will be the impact of my choices, sort of what if scenarios that I can, figure out and see that at the local level, decisions that I make, what happens city level, etc., which I felt was an interesting point.
Thank you, Sumitra and Shruti, for bringing some of those critical points from group number 2. Let me invite Niharika Kaul to report back from group number 3.
Thank you. So we also had a very interesting discussion, and to actually start with what Sumitra said, that yes, there was a similar point raised in our discussion as well, where someone said that what actually is the impact or use of those responses that people give to consultations, and what actually happens to those responses, are they used or not, is something that people often think about during these consultations. There was also this at the outset, I'd like to also state there was this common understanding amongst our group that a hybrid mode might be a plausible way of going about participation, citizen participation, and the intention of hosting a consultation is very important, where what is the government actually committed to incorporating those opinions is something that needs to be catered to. So starting from the from one of our speakers who brought in perspectives from Nigeria, Kenya, Zambia, said that often the process of citizen participation is tokenistic. So these consultations are tokenistic, and actually, a lot of countries are still very much dependent on physical hearings. But what happens is that many times the physical hearings have their own problems, such as the cost of travel becomes a huge issue and therefore actually reduces participation. There's also a lesson from this, that technology can actually be used to harness participation. But for that, obviously, there are several factors that need to be incorporated to have meaningful participation. There was also this idea that, examples such as constitutions of several countries, South Africa, Uganda, Ethiopia, suggests that, there was participation. And the hypothesis for this is that, people will rise to the defense of such laws if they actually are able to meaningfully participate. But often that actually doesn't happen and doesn't fall through these consultations. And there are also mechanisms within our country where actually there are laws which at least allow for people to witness consultations, even if not participate in them. But the problem comes in that even there are those exceptions, and they're not actually implemented or used by governments at the state and national levels, even though there are laws that actually allow for at least some level of full participation, if one could put it that way. There was also this idea about how, there is a need to have both online and offline modes, as I suggested before. There is also a need for there to be basically to lay down a framework to consult people while making these decisions, instead of actually having a post facto discussion with people after, those policies are framed. And there's also this idea about, how there is so in terms of steps, what steps can we take? There was this one idea about actually having secondary participation. So someone suggested that, what they did was that they went for the public consultation themselves, because their country relied heavily on that physical consultation. But then they recorded the session, and then through them they became the middlemen or middle women through which other people could hear the consultation. So what was suggested was that we as a civil society and others citizens need to really be active and need to take that positive step to become middlemen, middle women, to actually get through that level of participation for policies. And there are also other hybrid models such as citizen juries, and also the idea that young people today are a lot more well-versed with technologies, and their potential and capacities should be harnessed as well. There was a lot more discussion about access to infrastructure, but also the ability to use infrastructure, language being a barrier, the idea about actionable data being available, and strengthening counselors. Citizen participation is at a nascent stage, but obviously there needs to be more activism. The idea about data not being used, needs to be scrutinized more carefully, because often, even though there are numbers, doesn't mean that there's meaningful participation. And also the idea about really local level participation and seeping down to, kind of reaching the top, is that level of connect needs to be there for meaningful participation. There was a lot more discussion, but I think there's a paucity of time, so I'm going to stop here.
Thank you, Niharika. Simply amazing, the kind of discussion that happened in each of the groups. Excellent. I'm extremely aware about the time. It's already 6:55. Let me invite David Moore. David Moore is the Vice President of Legal Affairs at the International Center for Nonprofit Law. David, may I invite you for the closing remark? But before that, you share some insights that you have drawn from this group discussion and the reporting from this group discussion, and what Apar and Dr. Tandon have shared right in the beginning.
Thank you very much, Kaustubh, and greetings, everybody. It's a real pleasure and privilege for ICNL to be able to co-host this event along with Priya and Civis, and many thanks to Priya, everyone at Priya, for all the efforts going into this. Many thanks to all of you for your participation. I found the conversation today very refreshing. So many civil society discussions, particularly in this pandemic period, are focused on crisis. And this conversation really has been more about opportunity. Yes, there are challenges quite clearly that we have been discussing, but there's also really a powerful opportunity to make participation more real and meaningful. And we've come upon that opportunity in part because of the pandemic. I really, Kaustubh, just want to make 3 points, some of which will be drawing on what's been shared already, and some of which may be a little bit new. The first point is the importance of law. the right to participate is grounded in international norms. It's grounded in Article 25 of the International Covenant. And I think it's an important reminder to look at that as a starting point. In 2018, the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights issued guidelines on the effective implementation of Article 25, on the effective implementation of the right to participate. And these guidelines flowed from global consultations, as you might guess, and they address participation both in the electoral and non-electoral context, both at the national and international level. And they stress that the same requirements apply both offline and online. We're not talking about two separate set of principles. We're talking about a set of principles and requirements that should be imposed on governments that apply both to offline participation and online participation. So again, I think that's an important starting point. I won't detail the principles, but just to say that the state is obligated to maintain an enabling environment for association, expression, assembly, equality, and non-discrimination, all of which are hugely important for discrimination. For participation. So that is point one. Point two would be to say, and this draws on what several people have already said, that online participation should be approached as part of a broader approach, of a broader system, a broader framework of public participation. Because of the digital divide, online participation is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, yes, it can lead to much greater inclusivity for those who have reliable internet connections. But on the other, it may also lead to greater exclusion of those without the internet. So with that in mind, and this point was made by our colleague from Nigeria and several others, we have to prioritize internet access for everyone. That, of course, means reliable electricity as well, but that's not enough. There needs to be digital literacy. There needs to be citizen education, as several of you mentioned. So the point about the importance of maintaining both offline as well as online interpretation, the hybrid model. And third and finally, Kaustubh, I would just say that in terms of good practice principles, there was so much that was shared today. ICNL will be pleased to share with Priya, and perhaps through Priya with the rest of you, principles that we have developed on online consultations in particular. I won't detail them now. Again, we've talked about many, but I would say that they include the importance of impact, the importance that input provided has to be processed by the government in a way that leads to meaningful impact. Feedback should be provided, as has been pointed out, and I haven't heard about this so much, remedies. There should be remedies when public participation requirements are not satisfied. And this gets to the importance of monitoring government performance and ensuring that even where political will may be weak, there can be some means of redress. Thank you again so much. I've learned so much from all of you.
Thank you so much, David. I'm feeling elated. So I guess Antara and David would also feel like that because the kind of richness and the diversity that we have heard today, it's simply amazing. And Shruti will also be happy that you have got more food for thought for your research work. So thank you so much for participating, contributing in this discussion. I think three things that I sort of take from this discussion. One is, of course, many of you have pointed out that the diversity of channels of participation, and in order to sort of respond to different sort of access or differential access to technology, we must respond to. Second is the continued importance of intermediation. And when we thought that technology itself could intermediate participation between participation of citizens and bringing their voices in the policy making, but that technological intermediation requires some kind of human intermediation as well. So it has to go hand in hand. And third, everyone has talked about the importance of civic education, citizen education, and the quality of information and the quality of civic education will determine the quality of input in the policy making process. And lastly, the question of accountability that must be sort of demonstrated through our citizens' behavior, but also from the public officials' behavior. So it's a very complex discussion, but many of you have sort of tried to simplify it for all of us. And lots of concepts have been discussed today, and we need to further explore those various concepts. So thank you so much. Once again, thank you to David, thank you to Antara for partnering with Priya, and we continue to work together. And we have made many new friends through today's consultation, and will definitely would remain in touch with all of you. Thank you once again. Have a good evening, have a good day, wherever you are.